Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into the Age of Legends, and I'll be using interview questions from Robert Jordan himself to explain some of its concepts, how it differs from the Third Age, and the fact that it probably wasn't as perfect a society as we are led to believe. I always found it unfortunate that we didn't receive more information about this era because it really bridges the gap between science fiction and fantasy. So, these two topics of social order and utopia go hand in hand together. With a healthy and happy civilization, great advancements come more naturally. One of the biggest contributions to this so called utopian society in the Age of Legends was the mass amount of channelers, quoted by Robert Jordan to be in the millions. On top of that, they were incredibly strong in the One Power, much stronger than the majority of the White Tower Aes Sedai that we see in the main series. But besides this obvious difference, what set channelers apart from then versus the Third Age? There are two major points to talk about when answering this question. One is that in the Age of Legends, easing suffering and helping society was the greatest importance, and this is supported by the fact that everyone born in this era was born with two given names, but a person also had the chance to gain recognition and notoriety by attaining a third name. This third name was an honorific, similar to how in our society you could be called Reverend or Judge. But in the Age of Legends, this name was given specifically for public service. So let's compare that for a moment. Our society holds a great esteem for someone who has reached a certain level in their academic studies, like a doctor or professor. But because the Age of Legends was so hyper focused on public service and the betterment of living quality, you had a lot of resources going to food production, curing illnesses, and keeping cities and nations free of any pollution. So it's a little bit different than our own real world. You would need to really stand out. Not just any academic would get a third name. You had to be something really special. Imagine if you figured out a way to recycle all waste with a particular weave and eradicated the need for a landfill. It would be similar to a garbage man winning the Nobel Prize, then receiving a third name for their achievement, because the service could take the form of virtually anything so long as you are helping the human race. Overall, the most general form of respect came from the focus on healing. In the words of Robert Jordan, healing was probably the single most respected talent in the Age of Legends, in part because it eased suffering. Disease had been eradicated, but injuries still occurred. And that brings us to our next subtle difference between our channelers of the Third Age versus the Age of Legends, because channelers back then were so much stronger in the One Power. Being incredibly strong wasn't as special as having a rare talent. In the Wheel of Time series, we see many characters stand out because of their specific talents. A talent with a capital T is described as an innate special ability, and there are many. Take, for example, foretelling, the ability to tell the future with accuracy, cloud dancing, the ability to control the weather, or a very specific lost talent from the Age of Legends, which was called aligning the matrix, consisting of being able to strengthen metal. Because all talents are rare, this would be another way to earn recognition in the Age of Legends. One of the greatest healers of that time was a woman named Namine Demander Bone. She was taken all over the world because she could heal anything short of death. She later becomes the Forsaken Semirog. Now, the next topic I'd like to focus on is disproving the myth that the Age of Legends was in fact a perfect utopia, with emphasis on the word perfect. The first example of this is that evil still existed, crime still existed, and it seems like somewhat extreme measures were put in place because of it. Take, for example, the character Semirog that I just mentioned. Sure, she was the greatest healer the world had ever seen, but she was actually a criminal who took delight in making her healing weaves hurt. She was a sadist. Robert Jordan, in a 1996 interview, said she went into her profession because it provided an outlet to her sadist tendencies in the medical profession. Agenor was a biological scientist who never considered the consequences of his actions. Agenor would say, I wonder what would happen if I took the Ebola virus and altered it to be an airborne virus. He'd go ahead and just do that, all without realizing he'd be creating a potentially unstoppable plague. So it's pretty obvious there were people out there doing wicked things. The next piece of evidence supporting the idea that the Age of Legends might have been a little bit shady revolves around the extreme measures taken for punishment. At the time, there was an object called a binding rod. This ter'angreal was used to make oaths binding. Say you were a criminal caught doing something reprehensible. You swore an oath on the binding rod that made you physically incapable of breaking that oath. It also shortened your lifespan. If the item sounds familiar, it should, because there's one that is used in the Third Age. It is said that in this time, things like prisons weren't used or needed because of the use of binders. So criminals were forced to swear oaths on an object that shortened their lifespan. It's a bit of a philosophical question. Which method would be more moral? Prison time or revoking someone's free will against their will? Was the cost of low crime worth the price? It's actually why Semirog joined the side of the shadow, under the threat of the binder. So one could argue that it had a very undesired consequence when someone would essentially swear their soul to the Dark One in exchange for keeping their free will. It's a pity it had to come to that instead of channeling that compulsion in a much more healthy way, like, I don't know, becoming the Age of Legends' most sought after dominatrix. Moving forward. The last example that I think is worth talking about is regarding the Nim. First off, the Nim are a construct from the Age of Legends, with the ability to use the one power for the use of agriculture. The Green Man from the Eye of the World is a Nim. They were a new form of life created by science and the one power. On one hand, creating these new beings was overseen by a very strict code of ethics, so we're told. But when you dig a little deeper, their existence takes on something very dystopian and sinister. According to an interview with Robert Jordan in 2002, he states, Nim and Trollocs both have souls, and either could be reborn, but since Nim were a pure construct, i.e., each of them was individually made like handcrafting, a Nim would not be reborn as a Nim. You might say that a Nim's soul was borrowed temporarily from the supply of souls awaiting rebirth. A Trolloc, however, bears a twisted or corrupted soul and would be reborn as a Trolloc. Though, frankly, a Trolloc's soul is such a pitiful thing, it hardly seems worth calling a soul. This quote points us to the idea that cross-species reincarnation can occur. The soul itself could come from a human and be reborn into the handcrafted body of a Nim, whose main job was to sing on a farm and grow crops. We don't know what the life of a Nim was like. Did they enjoy doing this? Did they have any agency in this matter? I, for one, wouldn't appreciate my soul being inserted into a non human body for the sole purpose of farm labor. It's a bit of an odd situation, and despite being told the process of crafting the Nim was done in the most ethical way, it kind of makes you wonder just how utopian this era was. Now, all of this isn't to say that the Age of Legends wasn't utopian, but more or less to dispel the myth that everything was perfect. Because, in the strictest sense, a utopia doesn't have to be perfect, it can have flaws. The point of bringing all this up is to show that society itself wasn't flawless. I think another overall example is the channelers we meet from the Age of Legends. Lews Therin made himself some real enemies. After he is reincarnated, he believes this time around he will do better because he was raised better. Perhaps the world at this time had a very cutthroat hierarchy that led to the self evident nature we see so many of the Forsaken display. They joined the Shadow because they had a real unquenchable desire for power that wasn't suppressed by living a nice life. So let me know what you think. Are there any facts from the Age of Legends you find particularly interesting? How peaceful do you think it really was? Would you want to be reincarnated into a genetically manipulated farming construct? If you enjoyed this video, let me know by giving it a share, like it, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back next time.